Hi there, I hope things are well with you. So, in this video, I want to talk about the statistics and a lot of the data behind what's going on with the Wu flu. And I also want to talk about and get into the statistical modeling that that the Irish NPHET did. And I want to talk about some kind of inconsistencies and flaws that you can spot in it. Now, just kind of maybe two things to kind of start off with. The first thing is that this video, this presentation is going to get maybe a little bit technical in parts. So apologies for that, but I'll try and keep it as clean in relation to that as possible. And the second thing I want to talk about as well is just even from my own side, like I'm no mathematician, I'm no numbers person. I was just looking into this stuff and I found a lot of it, and I just kind of maybe want to get it out there and see what other people think. I'm not some far right guy, this, that, or the other. Like this is just a purely, this is just what I've noticed. I want to talk about it, and I don't really see that many other people talking about this kind of stuff. So I thought, why not? I might as well go through it or take you through it. So the first thing I want to point out is we've seen and we've heard and we've noticed that Laois, Offaly, Kildare have been locked down because, which is kind of interesting because I made a video talking about that, something like that would happen, but the regional one maybe a bit surprised me. But I was kind of saying that, like, you're going to have an inevitable spike in cases. The governments are going to react in terms of like lock it down, lock it down, lock it down. So I want to go through how serious is it if you get a case. Well, if we take a look at these charts here, one of the things you can find is that if you take the total period from when you started having cases, the virus broke out, you can see that, like, especially with new cases in relation to ICU, there is a reasonably strong relationship, right? So just a little kind of quick technical thing. It's what it says here, R squared, right? R squared is basically the percent of the variation that is explained by the line. So in this case, like, you can see that there is a relationship between people, new cases, new confirmed cases, as from the data.gov.ie's own data, and the ICU numbers. And you can see that for hospital admissions as well. In fact, the relationship is even a little bit stronger, and it kind of follows a more exponential line, or an exponential relationship. But the interesting thing is that relationship, right, after April and after May, that relationship doesn't exist anymore. So if you break out the relationship between ICU numbers and new cases from June to August, there is no relationship. There's no correlation whatsoever. And just to kind of maybe clarify as well, I played around with lags, all this kind of stuff, and there is no relationship. For the past 3 months, if you got a case, there's no real relationship between getting a case and ending up in ICU. There's a little bit of a relationship between getting a case between June to now and ending up in the ICU. But that relationship, it's interesting that relationship has started to become kind of more and more in the past while. But also, it is there a lot more, but it is still a weak relationship. So, in other words, these lockdowns are being based on, we want to protect people and we don't want our hospitals and ICUs being overloaded. But as of now, as of the past 3 months, any cases that have arisen the past 3 months, and, on the whole, like, the cases in the past while have been less than last month, despite the big hullabaloo of, like, we need to lock everything down. There's no relationship, basically. You get a case, you're not going to end up in hospital, or, you're not going to end up in ICU. That wasn't the case in April, and that wasn't the case in May, but that was because of the fact that you got nursing home breakouts, and you had older people kind of getting sicker with this as well. So that's why that relationship there exists basically. So I just thought I'd say that, like, like, just what's happened is we've gone from a pandemic to basically a case demic, and cases are not converting into deaths. They're not converting into hospital admissions, and they're not converting into people that end up in ICUs basically. So that's the first thing. The second thing I want to talk about there is the R naught, the reproductive rate, right? Now, if I go back here, right, these are some of the HSE's own projections, right? And they had R naughts of, like, 5 and 4 and this, that, and the other, right? But what the R naught essentially is just saying is basically, like, what you do is you get your it's just basically the growth rate of the virus. So, like, if you've got an R rate of 2, it's like 1, 2, 4, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, 1024, 2000. You get the point. It's just going up, like, by that kind of number. But the thing was with that R naught, right? That R naught is based on the cases, right? And if you have the total confirmed cases as we do now, you can work out what the actual R naught was in reality. So if I go to this sheet here, what I've done is I've essentially taken a 7-day moving average of the cases, because cases can get spiky from time to time to time, from day to day to day. And then I've taken, basically, I've kind of worked out the R naught from that number, and I've been able to graph it out. And one of the things you notice is that obviously it was quite spiky at the start, and their data only goes back to the 3rd of March. But one thing you see is that the R naught matches, apparently, the flu season, the influenza R naught, which is about floating around 1 to 2. So, and if you just draw a second order polynomial curve through this, then you get something which is reasonably good in terms of predicting what the R naught is. I mean, sometimes it flies up, sometimes it flies down. The problem is a bit with the R naught is that the R naught is being used like this big scary number, like, oh, we have to lock everything down because the R naught is 2. Well, the first problem with that is, like, if you've got a low number of cases, that's harder to predict and it becomes a lot more spiky. And the second thing is you need to take into consideration the scale of the number. So, you might go, oh my God, we have an R naught of 10, but it's 1 case to 10 cases. Like, when you have very, very low cases, you're going to get high R naughts anyway. So, I mean, like, if I just, I'll just do a quick thing here in Excel. If you, so let me just, Excel's, it's got this nice little feature you can forecast, right? So if I forecast, say, sorry for that, if I forecast, say, 90 days ahead, right? Then as we enter flu season, the R naught of the flu, the R naught of influenza in general goes up. Do you see that it's U-shaped? It's following a normal seasonal flu, a normal seasonal flu pattern. So the R naught is going to go up, like, but it's been this kind of seasonal pattern. You can kind of see it yourself. Now, maybe in reality, like, this is far, far higher than it actually was because of the big spike in deaths. There's a good article by a bunch of epidemiologists from India I'm going to get into that talk about the fact that in reality, like, this R naught was probably a bit higher than kind of said. But what I mean is that, like, this is what it's going to look like. And I don't know, I haven't gone through the Neil Ferguson code, but this little basic second order polynomial equation here, you do that, like, and you just extend that out, and that's going to be a reasonable predictor, I think, of where the R naught's going to be. It's just going to go up and down, spike a bit, go down a bit around this line. But that's based on the cases, based on the, and just kind of, smooth it out a bit just to make it easier to see visually. Like, this is like this isn't some mad statistical theory I'm coming up with or anything like that. This is their own, this is the HSE's, this is data.gov's own confirmed statistics, own confirmed cases. So I just wanted to kind of reference that or talk about that for a bit. Now, the next um, the next tab here we have is the RIP.ie deaths or the moving average. Now, I just wanted to flag this a bit because, you know, it's funny. Michal Martin was talking about the fact in a recent speech, he was talking about the fact that let there be no doubt that the lockdown worked and that we've done this to save lives. Well, I'm going to just go into two things just quickly. That the lockdown did not work, and we're actually getting to the stage, in my opinion, whereby the lockdown is, we're seeing the earliest stages that the lockdown is killing people. So if I go to this tab here, right, this is the relationship between Ireland and Sweden. I did a video on this before. I'm not going to spend that much, but I've updated it with recent data. And two things I'll just flag quickly. So you can see here that the correlation and the relationship between the increase in deaths for Sweden, who had no lockdown, and us who had a lockdown, is, the correlation and the way the time series plays out is exactly the same up until about mid-July, and Sweden started to flatten out, but we actually a bit earlier than that, maybe about 5th to the 7th, but then we start to go up, but Sweden are still going down. And by the way, just a quick comparison in terms of excess mortality, which is all the way down here. Bear with me 1 second. So Ireland's excess mortality is the exact same as Sweden's excess mortality from the beginning, from the period the pandemic began to about July the 25th. Exactly the same. So when Martin says that the lockdown saved lives, it didn't. And now, like I'm going to show in my next Excel slide, it's starting to kill people basically. So I'll get back to that. Let me just take a look there. So here in this graph here, you can see 2020 Sweden's deaths versus the 2015 to 2019 average. So this is how you kind of work out the excess mortality. So you can see that Sweden have floated along, and they're below their base, right? They're below their baseline, whereas we have gone down. We've 2020 went below the baseline for deaths, and then it started spiking up and up and up, and it's gone up again. And this is easier to see in this chart here. So you can see we go down, and then it pops up a little bit, and then it's below the trend line, and then it goes up, goes down to baseline. And over the past few days, it's been going pretty sharply up. So this area here that you can see my mouse indicator pointing at, this is around the time we're now kind of at the stage where the lockdown is killing more people than it's actually saved. So in that way, the government have been completely wrong. The lockdown has not worked. Sweden are back to base. Sweden are getting back to normal. And now we're seeing the earliest signs of the lockdown killing people. So, and that would be, I mean, first I'll just have to say, like, God bless Sweden, like, because at least they did, they've obviously made huge mistakes in terms of their nursing home stuff, but they did the right thing. And one of the things, as this gets worse, at least we'll be able to point to is Sweden, because my prediction is that Sweden is just going to go back to base. But with us, the lockdown is going to, and between all the stuff I said in a live stream I did on the second wave, I'm not going to get into that. Basically, this is going to go way, way up. So that's not good as well. That's not good as well. So um, now the next thing I just want to talk about there. Well, there's two quick things I just want to talk about. The first one is that there was a HICRA report on the fact that um, the deaths attributed to coronavirus are about maybe 500 higher than they actually were. And I just, like, when I looked at the RIP stuff, now they looked from 2010 to 2020. And I don't think that, I didn't like the idea of that because the uh, the numbers for RIP become much more unreliable the further you go out, because less and less people had the internet, less and less people were logging on, all that kind of stuff, right? So I just took a quick look from 2015. And if you take the average from 2015 to 2020, like it does look like they're reporting it correctly. But if I compare the last couple of years, right? So if I just take a quick average of these two numbers here, um, 309, 420. So that's, what is that? That's about 365 of an average. Yeah, it is. Yeah. So like the thing is with that is, once you take out the reported coronavirus deaths, right? Um, Based on the past couple of years, we're over reporting the coronavirus deaths by about 3 to 400, right? 3 to 400. So rather than like whatever it is right now, 1,770, it's more like 1,300. But that's where things get a little bit more interesting because glass of coke there. That's where things get a bit more interesting because we have to kind of work out then how good or how predictive these tests, a coronavirus or a WUFU test actually is. And this is what I was talking about in the last stream, something called a mathematical theorem called Bayes' theorem. And the idea here is to use Bayes' theorem to work out the probability of having coronavirus given that you have test positive. And this part is key to a lot of what's going on, this small mathematical theorem. So I'll just go over what the theorem is briefly. So the probability of A conditional on B is a probability of B conditional on A multiplied by the probability of A divided by the probability of B conditional on A multiplied by the probability of A plus the probability of B conditional on A probability of A, where A, whatever that line is, must be understood as not A. Okay, so there's a YouTube, there's a mathematician who did a quick little thing on this, and the numbers is, I mean, the guy seems to be a big brain kind of guy, and so I kind of started. He plugged the numbers. These are screenshots from his YouTube video. I'll link him down below, but you can do this quickly yourself in Excel. So the idea is that we have to work out what is the probability that you have a false positive. In other words, what is the probability that you are told by the doctor or by the tester you have coronavirus, but you actually don't. And this is where a lot of the asymptomatic stuff is coming in. So you fill in these numbers. So the probability that you have a false positive, given that you have corona, we're assuming that the test is really, really good, that it's 95% sensitive, multiplied by the probability that you have coronavirus, which is about 1% prevalence in the population. And that's probably true right now. I mean, I'm even looking around the kind of people I know, I don't really know anyone off the top of my head who actually even has the flu right now. So 1% prevalence, I'd say, is probably, as of now, is probably a fair number. 99 specific. So specific in this context means like, you have all the symptoms, you have your coughs, you have your, the loss of taste and all that kind of stuff. And once you plug all those numbers in, the probability that you have coronavirus, given that you, given the result of the test, is 0.49. So to rephrase that, the probability that there is a false positive is essentially a coin toss. So a lot of the people that are turning up are getting these tests, right? Especially, this meat factory thing. Even if you assume the test is absolutely excellent, 99% specific, 95% sensitive, they probably have the flu because it's not really floating around the population that much. So a lot of the cases, and I was taking a look on YouTube for kind of various videos and various doctors and whatnot, and some of them are talking about the fact that, like, you know um you give someone a test and it's only seven, even like this number might get a lot lower, but it could be the fact that, like, 30% of all tests are false positives. So 30% of people who are said to have coronavirus don't have it. So when you combine all that, when you combine the fact that there is no relation between cases and hospital admissions, there is no relation between cases and ICU for the past 3 months, when you combine the fact that our lockdown did not work and it looks like it's starting to kill people right now, and when you look at the fact that, based on a simple application of Bayes' theorem, a big chunk of the cases are false positives, so people who are told they have coronavirus actually don't have it. Basically this pandemic is kind of ludicrous, to be perfectly honest. It's just kind of a joke at this stage, and the economy and all of this has been wiped out for all this kind of nonsense, basically. And maybe I'm just misinterpreting absolutely everything here, but I'm just kind of wondering, like, what's going on, because is there someone in the like the Department of Health or this epidemiology team or board, like why is it, like, is anyone kind of doing this stuff? I mean, this isn't advanced at all. None of this. This is just like graphing one thing on the other, like, so it's a bit of a concern. So to kind of move on from that, I want to now talk about the actual model, right? The model that, when it comes up on the news, like, you have Professor Philip Nolan talking about, like, the R naught. What is that model actually based on, right? So I'm going to break that out as well. So I'm going to share with you a couple of government documents that are freely available on their website. I'll link them down below as well. So the Irish Epidemiology Modelling Advisory Group to NPHET, right? So what are they actually basing their models on? They're basing their models on this, right? I'll just scroll that down. So this, okay? Finally, we present technical notes on the approach used to estimate effective reproduction number over the course of the epidemic. This is a difficult parameter to estimate, and we are currently using 3 approaches, blah, blah, blah. Seer model can be used to infer R. Technique developed by Wallinga. Okay, fine. Time-dependent reproduction number. Here's the key part. As does the approach introduced by Flaxman et al. 2020. In other words, this is a model by a guy called Neil Ferguson, right? And this is an Imperial College of London model. So in other words, the Irish epidemiology group are using this model, okay? Now, how good is this model? Well, the reality is it seems to be terrible. And they even admit it here in this, or talk about it in this document here. So the epidemiology subgroup. So if we go to the numbers here, right? Number of cases. Oh yeah, I want to just address this kind of quick thing. They're basing the R naught here, as we can see from the case data, rather than maybe try and estimate what it actually is in the population. So that's not the most fair R naught. I'm also curious too about like their use of population age demographics, um, because that would be based on census data from 2016. So I wonder how updated and actually how effective that actually is. But if we go down to the results part, right? This is the interesting part, right? This part here. The estimated number of infections was seen to be highly sensitive to the assumed IFR. And just to clarify, IFR up here is the the infection fatality rate, just to clarify that for you and clarify that for me as well. The estimated number of infections was seen to be highly sensitive to the assumed IFR, and thus it was not utilized. This is bizarre, isn't it? Like, if we take a look at the graph over here, right? This is the predicted versus the actual. Daily number of infections, right? Look at it. Look at these numbers. Like, what is that? Like 7,000-8,000 a day, and then it just kind of goes up and down like this. Like, I think even at the worst we saw like 1,000 a day, and you can even see like this is the predicted, this is the actual. Like, this is like they are literally telling you in this, right? In this report, right? They're literally telling you that, you know, in terms of predicting cases, the model is highly unstable. Whereas my little second order little line, that's going to predict the R naught far better than this thing. It's incredible to me, right? So if we take a look at that, and then finally, if we just go through the actual, so this is a paper here, a population. This is the one. This is the Irish epidemiological modelling one, and you know they just go through a lot of the kind of mathematics stuff here. I'm not gonna, you know, I don't know. This is not my area at all. But like, I thought this was kind of interesting as well. You see this point here, right? The uncertainty shown within the quantiles in figures 3 through 5 is due to a range of parameters as specified in section 1.1. So if we look at figures 3 to 5, so what these different colors are, right? They're you know, they're intervals, like and they're kind of showing the degree of error, I think, anyway. And it's huge. Like, you just have a line through it, and then you have these massive intervals. Like, you know, like this is here, right? This is for number of, I think, cases, right? Yeah. And it's at the bottom end, you know, you're down near like the 25,000 mark, and at the top end you're at the 250,000 mark. Like, you know, like in these papers, like again, I'm not pulling anything out of random here. Like, I'm using the government's own data and the government's own literally own statistics reports in this, and they're literally telling you in the paper like the amount of complete uncertainty that's in the models, like, you know. And I'm gonna just talk through a couple of articles there. That kind of, I'm not going to read through the whole thing, but I'm just going to point out a couple of interesting points, right? You know, with the actual flaws in the model, right? So this is basically a critique of Neil Ferguson, the Imperial College pandemic model, right? So let's see what this guy has to say, right? So I'm just going to take out like a bunch of key paragraphs. So antibody testing has shown that a much larger number of individuals have been exposed to COVID-19 than previously believed, and possibly earlier than previously understood. This could have two implications. A, the mortality rate could be ultimately be lower, something in the range of 0.2 to 0.6%. So Once you take out the nursing homes, um, and kind of older people, this is the seasonal flu. Well, it's a bit, obviously it's more severe than that, but it's not. And obviously, like people, some people, it takes very long for them to recover. But you know, R naught could ultimately be higher, possibly between 2.6 and 3. I know that's kind of like, that's obviously higher and maybe contradicting what I've said earlier, but my point being is that like, um, this epidemiology lads, they built the model on cases, and based on the case R naught, they were getting R naughts of all over the place. But if we actually properly break it out and test it, the R and smooth it out just so that you can kind of see it move, develop over the week, over a period, the R naught was a lot lower. So that's my kind of point. Like, you know, we note that the progression of the disease in Sweden has not been particularly different to that in other countries. Further, in all countries, the progression of disease has tapered off. This could have the following implications: that A, the impact of lockdowns on R naught is relatively low, yes, or B, the impact of disease progression on R naught is much more front loaded than current models assume. Yeah, I just showed that a few minutes ago with the Ireland and Sweden thing. Um, the number of new cases plateauing. This may have the following implications: that isolating the LD is a viable strategy, particularly if more resources are deployed towards that purpose. And most of mortality and healthcare overburdening risk comes from the high risk clusters, about which we now have more information and can therefore plan better. And this is an important point too, because NPHET released a document, and that what that document basically did was, you know, it was a justification of why the bar is closed, and it was a ludicrous, ridiculous document, because it was talking about the fact that, you know, the funny thing was it was written to justify. Well, yeah, it was written to justify the bars, but it was picking out all these examples of like fecking student college house parties or in the United States and all this kind of stuff. But that doesn't tell you like how, like, it's not, when you get a cluster, it depends where it comes up. There's a big fucking difference between a cluster in a nursing home and a cluster with a bunch of 20-year-olds having a house party, and or a bunch of workers in a meat factory up in Kildare somewhere. Like, it's not just a cluster, it's where the cluster actually is, you know? And like this paper, like this article says, isolating the LD is a viable strategy. And yeah, so it's, you know, the cluster thing necessarily isn't an issue. And that cluster is going to be a lot smaller than think because of Bayes' theorem, all that kind of stuff. It's where it comes from, right? It's where it comes from. So the next part here, it talks about some of the flaws within the Imperial College model. The high-level implications of this new information on Imperial College model predictions could have included the following: that in the absence of any intervention, healthcare facilities would have been overwhelmed only for short periods of time, and much less intrusive or targeted interventions could have led to similar results to what we are seeing right now with lockdowns. Now, flaws with the model. The Imperial College paper was not peer-reviewed. The simulation and programming that it relies on has not been published in the public domain. It actually, this article is a bit old. You can actually run the Neil Ferguson code yourself, and I'll get onto that part in a sec. Given that its recommendations were at variance with the then prevailing policy in the UK, a very low bar seems to have been set by the international scientific community on its wide acceptance. So, no peer-reviewed, nothing, just kind of came out of nowhere. In retrospect, emergency situations like this pandemic should require a far higher and not lower level of scrutiny, since policy responses on these papers can have huge financial and health impacts. Further, while it is not a shortcoming of the paper per se, an issue has emerged regarding the democratic political process. Apart from our political party, no party in India or elsewhere seems to have had serious questions about this or other models. This suggests a need for democracies to strengthen their critical thinking capacity by creating an independent black hat institution whose purpose would be to question any technical mathematical foundations of government decisions. Yes, and the thing is with that, like I said before, I'm scratching my head to think, is there something actually genuinely nefarious or corrupt here? Because, like, I mean, like Bayes' theorem, this is like, you know, I'm not getting paid to do this. I put this together pretty quickly. Like, there are lads who are supposed to be paid hundreds and thousands a year doing what I'm supposed to be doing right now, and, you know, did they not think of like using Bayes' theorem or something like that? Because you're basing, like I said before, you're basing these lockdowns based on cases of which a big chunk of them are going to be false positives and which are not going to lead to hospital admissions and which are not going to lead to ICUs. They're only going to do so if they end up near old people, basically, right? So to move on from that. So the it's a one-sided analysis. It looks at the benefits of a lockdown without going to the costs. It also considers each death to be equal to every other death. We all accept a significant number of traffic deaths in order to reach our destinations faster. Our responses to various diseases, including influenza, are much less severe. In each of these cases, we implicitly or explicitly perform a cost-benefit analysis and agree that a human life can be traded, in the policy sense, against some benefits to society that are compared in economic terms. At a minimum, we look at current patterns of behaviour and expectations and examine current trade-offs. So, basically, you don't just kind of rush in and say, let's have a lockdown, which they've done. You basically go, can we have a bit of a cost-benefit analysis thing? People are going to, kill themselves because they don't have a job anymore. What will that look like? People being scared to go to hospital appointments. What will that look like? People getting more and more obese and drinking more, becoming more alcoholic, which will lead to more, suffering. What's the kind of cost-benefit analysis of that? None. There's none in this model. There's none. So, second issue is whether all lives are equal. This has grave implications, particularly during the current pandemic, which is very high mortality rates for the elderly and those with complications. But even then, it's not extremely high. I mean, I think I did some kind of, I think in nursing homes, like, if you got this in a nursing home, the probability of you, surviving is 80%. That's horrible, obviously. But, 80% of the time you can be old in a nursing home and you'll get through it. So, I apologize if that sounds a bit kind of crude, but those are kind of numbers, once a detailed Imperial College model and its assumptions are published, our team will further examine whether the model is fit for purpose. For instance, we now know that the virus behaves in some ways like flu, not like SARS. In the case of SARS, most patients were not that contagious until around a week after the symptoms appeared. That enabled contact tracing and isolation strategies to be applied to contain and ultimately eradicate the virus. But a vast proportion of COVID-19 patients can transmit the virus even when they are not symptomatic. This has implications for the modelling approach. The WHO, in its October 2019 report entitled Non-Pharmaceutical Public Health Measures for Mitigating the Risk and Impact of Epidemic and Pandemic Influenza, looked at the entire scientific literature and rejected contact tracing and quarantine of exposed individuals, i.e. lockdowns, as a policy option for severe flu pandemics. Fucking hell. Isn't that mad? Isn't that crazy? In 2009, the WHO were against lockdowns. It needs to be examined closely. Neil Ferguson and his team should have paid more regard to those well-established pre-2020 scientific learnings that apply to flu-like pandemics such as this one. Given the information at hand, we have reason to believe that the epidemiologists in Sweden have applied the more robust and justifiable scientific approach. And just to go back to the slide I have here on Sweden, back to normal, we're going up. Back to normal, we're going up. And just to flag this again. Okay. 14% excess mortality for Sweden, 14% excess mortality for Ireland. Right, now, next bit. So I talked about some of the criticisms of the actual model. Now, I'm just going to talk quickly a little bit about some of the kind of more technical codey stuff. Now, this is not my area at all, but I just wanted to point out a few interesting things that, how bad this is, right? So this is done by some anonymous person who worked in Google between 2006 and 2014, right? So just a quick thing, right? The actual nature of the code itself. It isn't the code Ferguson ran to produce his famous Report 9. What's been released on GitHub is a heavily modified derivative of it, having been upgraded for over a month by a team from Microsoft and others. This revised code base is split into multiple files for legibility and written in C++, whereas the original program was a single 15,000 file line that had been worked on for a decade. This is considered extremely poor practice. So, and the next part here, a request for the original code was made 8 days ago but ignored, and it probably takes some kind of legal compulsion to make them release it. Clearly Imperial are too embarrassed by the state of it to release it of their own free will, which is unacceptable given that it was paid for by the taxpayer and belongs to them. So the code is so bad. The code is so unbelievably bad that they're not willing to hand it over. But it gets worse than that. What's being done is described as SimCity without the graphics. It attempts to simulate households, schools, offices, people, and their movements. I won't go further into the underlying assumptions, since that's well explored elsewhere. Non-deterministic outputs. Due to bugs, the code can produce very different results giving identical inputs. They routinely act that this is unimportant. This problem makes the code unusable for scientific purposes, given that a key part of the scientific method is the ability to replicate results. And where have you seen? I brought this up before. Why have NPHET not been transparent in terms of this? Just do a quick, you just go, this is what our model got, this is what it actually was. You plot one on top of the other. If the fit is good, well, okay, you're grand. You know, the model is good. I assume. If the two lines diverge, you know, the predicted is way off compared to the actual, then your model is shit. Like, there's no other line for it. Like, but just to go into this, without replication, the findings might not be real at all, as the field of psychology has been finding to its cost. Even if the original code was released, it's apparent that the same numbers as in report 9 might not come out of it. So, okay, this is some boring match shit. I don't need to get into it. So, I'll illustrate with a few bugs. In issue 116, by the way, this issue is a GitHub related thing. A UK red team at Edinburgh University reported that they tried to use a mode that stored data tables in a more efficient format for faster loading, and discovered, to their surprise, that the resulting predictions varied by around 80,000 deaths after 80 days. That mode didn't change anything about the world being simulated, so this is obviously a bug. The Imperial response is that it doesn't matter, that they are aware of small non-determinisms, but that historically this has been considered acceptable because of the general stochastic, they mean random basically, I think their nature of the model. Note the phrasing here. Imperial know that their code is bugs, but act as if it's some inherent randomness of the universe rather than a result of amateur coding. Apparently in epidemiology, a difference of 80,000 deaths is a small non-determinism. So, basically, if you were to go to NPHET and go, I want to see the results, I want to see the exact code that you ran, you did that, you wouldn't be able to get the same results because the code is so buggy and so messy, basically, you know, and they know this and they've been trying to dismiss it and all this kind of stuff. You know, and there's more kind of nonsense like this, you know. It's kind of getting into like it's kind of getting here into the fact that like there's this thing called a regression test. I don't really know what that is. Undocumented equations. Much of the code consists of formulas for which no purpose is given. You know, like for example, on line 519 on setupmodel.ccp, there is a loop all over the places the simulation knows about. This code only appears to be trying to calculate R0 for places. Hotels are excluded during this pass without explanation. And then he goes into a paper. R0 is both an input to and an output of these models and is routinely adjusted for different environments and situations. Models that consume their own outputs as inputs. Oh, Christ. Is problem well known to the private sector. It can lead to rapid divergence and incorrect prediction. Yeah, like, it just goes on and on and on. Despite being aware of the severe problems in their code that they haven't had time to fix, the Imperial team continue to add new features. For instance, the model attempts to simulate the impact of digital contacting tracing apps. Conclusion. All papers based on this code should be retracted immediately. Imperial's modelling efforts should be reset with a new team that isn't under Professor Ferguson and which has a commitment to replicable results with published code from day one. On a personal level, I'd go further and suggest that all academic epidemiology should be defunded. This sort of work is best done by the insurance sector. Insurers employ modelers and data scientists, but also employ managers whose job is to decide whether a model is accurate enough for real-world usage, and professional software engineers to ensure model software is properly tested, understandable, and so on. Academic efforts don't have these people, and the results speak for themselves. So yeah, the lockdown are not, when Philip Nolan talks about it, like I've shown, they're basing everything on a bullshit, wrong software engineer disaster code that cannot be replicated whatsoever, and is producing such bad predicted actual results. A little bit of simple, like, leaving cert maths will predict the R naught better than this, like. And this is what's going on right now. It's apologies. I don't mean to be getting kind of angry, but like, fucking hell, like, and the other thing I just kind of wanted to flag as well, like, I'm still kind of thinking, like, did they just simply not think about this? Did they simply not consider going down this route? Or are they actually that, or is there something more sinister going on? But then again, I took a look into, say, the head of the epidemiology, Philip Nolan, yeah. And Philip Nolan doesn't have a background in epidemiology, right? He practiced medicine for a short time, but having involved in research and teaching as a student, was drawn to an academic career. He earned a PhD for his research on the control of breathing and the cardiovascular system during sleep. Like, he's not a statistician. He's not a data scientist. He's not, like, why is he ahead? Why is he in charge of Irish epidemiology modelling? I'm genuinely confused, because, like I said before, like, if you're pushing these lockdowns and something as simple as that, like, all these really smart guys, like, would know, like Bayes Tyrone, like, half of the tests right now, even more potentially, are false positives. Absolute clown show. Absolute fucking clown show, right? So just to kind of bring this back, because apologies if I've kind of gone on for too long of a period of time, but I just want to sum this up quickly. Like, the Irish government have destroyed the economy. We don't have an economy anymore. They've destroyed the economy. And what have they based that destruction of the economy on? They've based that destruction of the economy on cases rather than deaths. Cases that have no relationship with getting put in ICU. That have cases which have no relationship, for the past 3 months, let me flag, that have no relationship with hospital admissions, or a little bit, but not that much. A lockdown that hasn't worked at all, if we compare it to Sweden. Cases, just to go back to the cases, where half of them are false positives. And now we're seeing the start of a trend whereby the lockdown is killing people now. That's what we're seeing right now. And that's being built by a team that are using a model by a guy, which the code doesn't work. The code is a mess. You can't replicate the thing. And it is extremely poor predictive power. I mean, remember back in the day, Simon Harris was talking about the fact that, 80,000 people, or Leo Varadkar, 80,000 people dead, and, we could reach 120,000 cases in this and this period. Like, and no journalist has spoken about this. Like, you can say what you want about Britain, but at least they've, like, Peter Hitchens, and, Peter Hitchens has torn this stuff apart. But we've, no one is questioning this. No one. Like, this isn't, apologies maybe if this is maybe a bit technical, but, like, this stuff, like, I mean, look, I got this snippet from a HSC report, like, cumulative confirmed cases. These are projections, like 40,000, like 40,000 by uh, the end of March. We're 26,000 or so cases now. And God knows, a big chunk of them are going to be not coronavirus. You know? And then, like I said before, like I said in that last stream that I did, it's just going to be very, the whole process of this has just been extremely reactive. Like, we need to clamp down, but you need to, why don't you think things through? No, we need to clamp down. And now there was a thing that came out that Pascal Donoghue was talking about keeping restrictions or certain components of the lockdown into next year. So, but we know that those lockdowns, they're not going to work. None of this is going to work. The reality is, we know what this is, right? It affects elderly people. Okay? So what do? You protect your nursing homes. Well, okay, this is what I would do. Or this is what, like, Dolores Cahill and people like that have talked about. This is what you do. Let everyone out for a week. No face masks, no social distancing, no bullshit. None. Then you go to a pharmaceutical company, you buy a shit ton of vitamin D, you buy a shit ton of vitamin C, you buy a shit ton of hydroxychloroquine, and I will talk about the media here. Because Trump talked correctly about the fact that hydroxychloroquine actually does work, our media just went, oh, Orange Man, bad. And we didn't use it, and probably people died because of that. And then once you do that, maybe talk about, like, okay, well, maybe switch your diet over to more kind of meat, fish, eggs to boost your immune system, rather than eating a big pile of carbs, whatever. And that's it. That's all you have to do. That's what Sweden did. And they're back to normal, and they will end up with a lower excess mortality rate than us by the end of the year, I would say. So, yeah, that's it. That's kind of it for me. This is a very, very long one. I'm just checking how long did I kind of. Yeah, Christ, this is almost an hour long. But it's just kind of putting everything together and, just talking through it. Like, I don't know what's going on in, wherever, the Department of Health or whatever. Like, I don't know if it's just they're just making mistakes or what, but, like, this thing is nothing. Absolutely nothing. Nothing in terms of deaths. We don't know, a lot less cases than have been made out to be a model that doesn't work. And you've destroyed the economy over it. So, yeah. And I wonder, do they know that too? I have a sneaking thing that they do, because all of them, all these civil servants, all these politicians, they've all thrown their hat in with this, and they can't go back in it. But the reality is just a bit of, get some numbers from data.gov, get some numbers from RIP.ie, get Sweden's own debt numbers, work out a projected or not. And you can see that, yeah, it really is sad. Like, this is a tragedy. Like, this, it really is. Like, also, well done to Sweden as well. But, like, it's an unbelievable clown show is what this is. So, and I hope people start getting sense soon, because we're heading into an economic Armageddon, and it's not going to be easy for anyone. So, anyway, look, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you if you got this far, because this is almost an hour long, and I will see you in the next video. Bye. 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 Bye.